All right. We'll go ahead and call this June 17th Charter Review Committee meeting to order. We'll begin with an approval of the agenda. Anybody like to make a motion to approve the agenda as was advertised? I have a motion from Naeem, a second from Jessica. Any questions or changes to the agenda as it was advertised? If not, any comment from the public? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. I'd like to note that review member Ms. Hauser will be joining us later if she can, but we have a quorum here as well. Okay, we'll move on to approval of the May 20th minutes. We were down to 4 committee members for that meeting. So take a minute to look over those minutes, and as soon as someone's comfortable, go ahead and we'll make a motion to entertain approval of those.
Make a motion to approve.
I have a motion from Walt, a second from Jessica. Anybody have anything in those minutes that it's not how it went in their head and their memory?
I just on page 4 at the bottom.
I think that's supposed to be lead. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other catches? Okay. If not, I have a motion properly seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. And we are on to the old business, Article 6, Executive Officers. And in my packet, I have the election calendar first. So should we go through the calendar before we talk about the actual article? Is that how we had it planned, staff? I think when we were talking about the executive officers, we had discussed a couple of things in the amendment. One was, when do we want to have the charter on the ballot for a vote? And at the time, we had discussed a standalone voting day where people could really focus on the charter and just focus on the charter, or having it attached to our April elections, which is the cheapest and easiest route to take. It is also possible that you put it on during the fall, during the primaries. And sort of the thinking behind it was that sometimes charters get political instead of being about the best option. So the advantage to having it as a standalone is that you could focus on it. You wouldn't have a political candidate, flip-flopping a position or those kinds of things as they go. People could just sort of say, I think this is the right way to go. You have a core of folks who would probably be dedicated to studying that charter and really understand what they're voting on. Our highest voter turnout would probably be putting it on the primaries. That's when you're already going there to vote for your party candidates, but then you might not have people who really understand what's in the charter. I know a lot of folks, they vote for what they want on, they leave the rest of the ballot blank. So we asked Ms. Judy if she could create a calendar for us to let us know what our timeline would be for different decisions that we would make. And I believe she's about to tell us that a standalone election is off the table because of limitations from the supervisor elections, which would take us to an April or a fall. Is that right? And with that, Ms. Judy, if you will, sort of take it away.
Take it away. Okay. The reason why I decided not to do a fall calendar, for one thing, I do not have one of the days where we would have to have the language ready for our county supervisor. And that would be sometime in June, but the state has not provided information to her at this time. We would have the city, the expenses would be more because you would have 2 precincts, not 1. You'd have 4 and 6, and we would also have to fund 2 sets of poll workers. So it would probably double what our elections usually are. And I'm assuming, since it's on the primary, that we'd also have to have the Spanish, the Spanish language
Interpreter.
as well. So there was just a lot of other additional expenses that we do not usually incur during our municipal elections. But that's how we would be accommodated by the county supervisor. It would have to be on the primary for the fall.
So the calendar we have in front of us, Miss Judy, is only if we want to recommend to the commission that we have it on their regular April commission.
That is correct.
Ballot. And by the time I have a proclamation declaring the election, do we have to have the ballot language already settled, or is that what it says down here on
Where we
March
advertise?
12th?
Well, when the mayor presents a proclamation, there are certain things that have to be, per Florida statute, included on that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're having a referendum, I believe that has to be on that proclamation as well.
Okay, so we need to have everything, this committee needs to be done, and the commission needs to be done with its workshops and agenda items before February 10th,
Right.
to have it on the 2020.
That's correct.
Ballot.
Now, our language will not be due until after qualifying, just as if it was only, qualifying, not the referendum or question ballot. So, but in preparation, my understanding is that it needs to be on the proclamation.
Okay.
Some reference to that referendum or question.
Okay. So I guess I wanted to just step back and just do, obviously it would cost more money to have it in fall. It's a little bit more complicated. That doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't make that recommendation. Having it in April keeps it more Newberry-centric, I guess. Puts us under a little bit tighter timeline. What's the committee's thoughts? What would you recommend to the commission?
Well, my first thought is once we, as a board or committee, get our business taken care of and we finalize everything to be able to send to the commission, and they go through what they have to do we have enough time for the educational process to get this in front of our citizens before or for our April election?
It's a really good question. In my mind, if this ends, let's say everything goes well and this is the last committee meeting tonight, we will begin having workshops at the end of July, August, somewhere in there. And so we would have 2 to 3, and then we'll just kind of, it may take 4 workshops to get the commission up to speed on all the work that you guys spent a year doing, which now puts us, probably September, October, but probably more like October by the time that's all done. So that would basically give you, let's say we're wrapped up mid-October, that gives you a little bit of October, basically gives you November, December, January, right? 3 months, which is, now that you still have another month, you still have February and March to continue doing that. You have all the way up till April to do the education about this is what you're voting on. So that adds another couple of months. So that's about 5 months. I mean, I would say that's if people who want to become educated, that's plenty of time. People who want to tune in and read it, it is my intention, once this board has completed its work, the commission has completed its work, to begin filming short little videos, informational videos that we can post to try to help. We'll continue to have public workshops, Q&A kind of sessions where we could have the existing charter, the proposed charter. We all know how difficult it is to get folks to kind of come to those kinds of things, especially, do you break it up and you have a workshop, we have the municipal building, and you just look at 1 or 2 articles and you do that 2-3 times a week for those 4 months? Or Do you have a specific question? I mean, I think that the controversial questions are gonna be the things that we spent the time talking about, the 2-year terms to 3 years. Do we have a caveat that gives the commission the ability to waive the manager's requirement to live inside? You know, I mean, you guys know the things that we sat up here and talked about for an hour, so maybe it would be better to have the community workshops where you just ask that question and you let people kind of give you feedback about that. But I think that 5 months would be enough time to do that. Now, if the commission begins taking longer and eating into that time, then it might be something where we say, okay, we missed our deadline, and now we're going to spend a year on that education, and we'll do the election on the 2021. But I think we can get started, and then you guys can give the commission feedback and say, I don't think the town is comfortable yet. You know, I don't think they still have a lot of questions, that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, the bulk of what we've done here is just make our charter
Smaller.
smaller. We added brevity to it. We didn't really change anything. We cleaned it up. So being able to focus on those changes that were actually made, like the ones you mentioned, shouldn't be as challenging at that point. So I'm thinking getting it all taken care of by our April election shouldn't be a problem. You know, getting all the education out that needs to be out, because I mean the actual changes were minimal.
And that's going to be the very first video, is that this charter review committee really went in and fixed some 1 foot in the old world, 1 foot in the new world, outdated information, that kind of thing. So it was how do we make it easier to understand, easier to read, shorter, more comprehensive, that kind of thing. So I have a head nod that our goal should be this calendar here. That's what we want to recommend to the commission.
I do. That's absolutely.
Okay. Sounds almost unanimous head bobbing. So, yeah.
I mean, I like the fact that it does save our city some money doing it this way as well.
Sure. Okay. Well, we will
We'll strive for the
push,
closer, yeah.
Madam Clerk. We'll push this calendar here to the commission. We'll say this is what the committee has recommended. We'll try to hit, which means we really want to have all of the work and the workshops done so that we know that this is the charter we're putting through way before that February. Anyway, we probably want to try to hit that October date for the commission to have a final vote on, yes, this is the charter we're going to put through. That way we have a couple months of education before, and then we can start working on the ballot language. Okay? All right. And we are still on our, item A, executive officers. And Rich, you taking us through Article 6, or did we already hit the?
The beautiful thing about this is we've already covered this like 5 times.
Yes, right. Yeah, I know.
So,
We're cruising.
I know we were missing some of our members in our last meeting, but we took back the recommendations from the committee, going back, I couldn't even tell you what month was this one, but we brought an abbreviated version in terms of powers of the 3 officers, and we added in, I think one new thing that was voted on last time around is a couple supermajority standards. You recall that for the city manager. Make sure I'm looking at the right part here. As far as the residence requirement, we added language. I'm looking at what is marked as the new section 24. If you could follow the red line. But at the end of that first paragraph, it says, for good cause shown by supermajority vote, the city commission may permit exceptions to the residency requirement. So there's something built in there, but at the same time, it's a supermajority standard, so it's not an easy threshold necessarily. And then the same thing with the city clerk. We wrote in a supermajority standard when it comes to serving as the supervisor of municipal elections. There may be circumstances where the commission prefers to delegate that responsibility county supervisor of elections, and that would have to be done by a
Where we at?
majority vote. Now I'm.
Section 26.
I skipped forward to what is now the new 26.
Okay.
Again, I'm referring to the red line.
Are you on B?
Yeah, he's in here.
Yes.
I'm just looking at the
So
new
you're
one.
in B.
because I've seen it. Yeah.
So we've had some very good dialogue, discussion on this section, and the language as it stands right now in here, what we voted on last time around, on a 4-0 vote. We have new members here, so if there's further discussion to be had, now's the time on this one.
And basically, the board will recall that the idea here was we're good with the caveats, but we wanted to make it a little bit tougher for the commission to do it. So the commission, has the ability to waive the requirement for the city manager to not live inside the city limits, but they have to have 4 votes to do that. So it's got to be really good cause in order to convince 4 people. Same thing for the clerk. And I believe that suggestion came from the board. Okay. Everybody happy with that language? And Rich, help me remember where it may be in city elections, when we have an emergency and the city manager takes over, right? There was the question of how does the commission get power back?
I can take that one. So this was initially it was in the mayor's section.
Okay.
Article 3.
And is that, where is it in the new section,
So what we've done is
or the new charter?
You all initially requested putting this in the city manager section.
Okay.
There is a Florida statute, and this Florida statute, I might have my comment on it for you as well. You go to Article 3. Florida statute 870.042. I thought I was talking loud enough, but now you can hear me. Saying that essentially you can by ordinance designate a person to be in charge of declaring a state of emergency, but that person shall be either the mayor or chief of police or the person who performs the duties of a mayor or chief of police in the municipality. So based off that, we pulled some other charters, and really no one talks about the emergency powers in the charter. They do it all by ordinance. So what we would suggest is pulling this out of the charter altogether and coming up with an emergency plan by ordinance. And the typical way it's done is, I saw one, I believe it was the city of Gainesville, that the city manager could declare a state of emergency, but it had to be affirmed by the board, the commission, within 2 days. And it's typically for a period of 7 days, unless the emergency continues, then you can extend for an additional 7 days. So what we can do during the workshops is, depending on how you'd like to approach this, we can talk about the ordinance along with the charter, or that could be a separate issue altogether, but it typically is done, it seems,
Okay.
by
So
ordinance.
I couldn't find it in the new charter because it's not there.
Correct.
That's right.
That's a good answer. That's
This
good.
is a new
I looked
development.
for it.
This is cutting edge law, what you're looking at. right
Yeah,
here.
so basically, we're going to put this into the realm of, that's not charter worthy, because we want to be able to change that perhaps more frequently.
And then by default, taking it out of the charter to the extent there's not a current ordinance in place, by default, the mayor has that power. So it is a matter of getting this in front of the commission, and there, like Andrea said, there are several different ways we could approach it. In terms of the length of time that it's considered an emergency, whether the city manager first declares it. But this is definitely, from our research, something that needs to be addressed by ordinance rather than in your city charter, believe it or not.
I'm fine with that. Is the board fine with having it done by?
Yes.
By ordinance.
Recommended as an approach as well from the board too, so
Okay. Rich, anything else in Article 6 that we want to go over, since we have the entire board here? I know that everybody on the board has gone over Article 6 at least 2 times, but this is our last shot at at any verbiage or any, so, why don't I
And
just give everybody a second here to kind of skim through
Absolutely.
it.
And just to refresh everyone's memory on it, in terms of the lists of, for each of the officers, we had a pretty lengthy list, or we have one in our current charter, and ultimately what we did was we called that down to really focus on the powers of those positions more so than duties, with the idea that most of those other responsibilities can be addressed through other means, whether it's through the city manager's contract or policies and procedures or resolutions or other ordinances, but the focus is on the core powers of each charter officer position.
We did. I have a hard time reading that one after read the other one. As soon as you guys are comfortable, I'll entertain a motion to approve Article 6. I have a motion from Walt.
Second.
I have a second from Mark. Is there any last thoughts, comments, questions on Article 6, executive officers? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, well done, legal. It's one article unanimous, right? Okay, city elections, Article 7.
So last time we were here, we talked about the two options of keeping the 2-year terms or going to staggered 3-year terms. And that's the main change that we had for city elections. So this, I believe, was also approved for last time, but we'll go through it really quick in case anyone had questions, and then we'll talk about the potential ballot language for 3-year terms so that you can see what it would look like if we brought that to the ballot as well. Really, other than elections, what we did is the Board of Canvassers section, we have now said will be by ordinance. So we've added a section 28 that, let's see, that said that it'll all be outlined as outlined in the Code of Ordinances, rather than it used to be a section, I believe, in the City Commission section that went through the lengthy process, but had some conflicts with our ordinances. So we're going to clean that up in the code. Other than that, we have section 32, which actually used to be under the new section 33, interim government, and it was just two sections that didn't really make sense together. We had interim government and under it some miscellaneous provisions related to the resign to run laws. So we pulled that out and put it in its own section, section 32. And then, let's see, after that, section 34, it initially had talking about impeachment of the mayor for misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, and we've pulled all that out and said that he would follow the same guidelines as the rest of the commission for removal. And now it's just titled vacancy in office. and discusses the way that you would approach a vacancy, whether or not it's 6 months out or less than 6 months out. So if it's less than 6 months, the mayor would appoint and the commission would vote, and if it's more than 6 months, you would hold an election. Then there's judge of elections and qualifications of members, which again, initially I believe was in another section. We pulled it in here at one point and then decided to cross it out, that it was not charter worthy. Those are the main changes, other than the possibility of a 3-year staggered term. So before we get into that language, did anyone have questions on those changes?
Questions? And we will now wait the 10 days in this charter, right? So we'll have election 10 days after we'll have the swearing in.
I believe so.
And that's because there's a state statute that speaks to that, the challenge period. I think that's going to be one of the more controversial things that we got to educate folks on. We have a pretty long tradition of swearing folks in the next day.
Do you see them?
Right, so the language that we have in there is, it says on the 10th day after the election, or as soon as practicable, but no later than 30 days following the election.
Okay. Okay.
Section 27, the absolute last line, what kind of coin is the clerk going to use?
This is a good question. Let's say it has to be a quarter.
A quarter?
I think
Okay.
a gold dollar.
I was going to say we ought to use a Sacagawea or something like that.
Yeah.
Susan B. Anthony or whatever.
Yeah, it can't be a penny. Those go too far. Right?
As long as it's not a dual out back.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be something else?
I tell you, all that work, it comes down to a flip of the coin. Wow. All right. Any other questions about what we just? No, we're gonna talk about the staggered year periods, right? Okay, go right ahead.
So I have some handouts to make it a little easier for everyone. We've talked about what
We like a visual.
I do exactly.
Yeah.
And I'll do exactly. We talked about what kind of language would be on the ballot for staggered terms. I'm not sure I'll pass these out. And so Gainesville did this a few years back.
Judy, did you
And-
get one? Pass one back down there. We need one, another one. There we go. Need one of these? Yeah. Slide her down here. All right.
What'd you say, Naeem?
I was talking randomly.
So the sample ballot from Gainesville, this was back in 2013, and they had proposed changing their elections. So you can see a sample of how that is done on a ballot. If you want to look that over and see if you have any questions there, essentially just says, shall the city charter be amended to require regular municipal elections every other year in odd-numbered years, rather than every year, beginning with the regular election in 2017, and to change the terms of office of the mayor and city commission from the current 3-year terms commencing in May to 4-year terms commencing in January 2018, and to provide transitional terms without office as proposed by ordinance number 120/369. So that's the way that they structured the proposed language on their ballot.
So let me just stop.
Yep.
If we had, so if everything goes well and we have this in April, that top box there would be for the commissioners, right? The middle box there would be for the charter itself in total. The last box would be for the term limits or the term lengths from 2 years to 3 years. So we'd be asking people to vote on 3 commission seats, assuming that all 3 had opponents, right, which would be in the top. Then the charter, do you approve the charter, right, standalone, and then the staggered term limits?
To an extent, there is a lot, there may be a way to only say, do you approve the charter as amended? But from what I've seen, they've put separate questions for the different areas the charter being amended. So for instance, in
That's a really important distinction there.
In
because-
Danya, right, in Danya Beach, what they did is essentially, they had 10 questions on their ballot. And they were charter amendment ballot questions. So.
We just want the one.
Will we have
But-
sufficient education prior to the ballots coming out? That way all we have to do is
The-
ask one question.
Well, the charter that people will be voting on is with the 2-year term
Correct.
that we have.
Correct.
Then the second question would be, do you support moving to the 3-year term limit? But it's really important for this board to be clear, because we're operating under the assumption that we can throw the 3-year out there as a standalone question, so that people can vote yes on the charter, but no on 3 years, and the charter keeps going forward.
Right, so the charter amendments would be separate. Whether we can lump it as one question, do you approve the charter as amended, we can look further into. The way I've seen it done so far has been looking at multiple questions about the different changes to the charter. But they would all be, again, assuming 2-year terms, and then down at the bottom, hey, would you rather do a 3-year term? So that the charter would not pass or fail based off the change to 3-year terms.
Okay, I think I understand, but let me let Jim get in.
Let's assume that the charter doesn't pass, but the 3-year term does.
That's a really good question. Does
'Cause
that
it could
mean we
happen.
stick with the same charter, but now we go to 3 years with the old charter? Or does the language of the question, I mean, I think this is about the language, right? So we say in the year, would you support in the new charter, moving the commissioners to 3 years? That way it's clear if the new charter doesn't pass, then the 3 years doesn't pass either.
I believe we can set it up like that. I mean, I think we can do the charter as one question, although, I mean, I think what we're looking at here is an example of where they broke it up into pieces. But I don't think that they did it this way just because that's what's required. I think we've got some options to do you approve all the changes as is, and then a separate question like this that says, what about a 3-year? I think we
Right.
can do it that way.
Okay, because what doesn't make sense to me about asking all these questions is, what if I say yes, no, where do I go with that? Well, they approved 6 out of 10 changes, so that's overall a yes. So I'm thinking it's a yay or nay vote on the new charter. That's it. And then there's really only one sort of controversial question, is this the term length, So let's see let's make sure, Rich, that we can have that answer 100%. Let's move forward like that is the answer. Or do you already have that answer?
No, I think we definitely want to research this further, because Andrea is saying from what she is seeing that we might not be able to do it that way. I think we need to hone in on this issue a little bit more.
I think so too.
Whether we bring that back for another meeting versus addressing it at our workshops, which I know we're going to be talking about that.
Well, let's just go ahead and throw it out here. Let's say we can't do it that way, it seems to me like this board is kind of 50-50 on it. It might not be. If we can't put it as a standalone question, do we even want to put it out there as an option, or just have the charter with 2 years and let people vote on the charter? Well,
See if I can phrase this correctly. When people are filling in their ballots on the two questions, one for the charter and one for the three-year term, if they vote yes for the charter and yes for the 3-year term, are they expecting, or will there be language saying when the terms will be, like Gainesville has theirs broke down? If you vote yes on it, it'll start here, and we'll have the transitional term
Right.
starting here. I mean, so are they going to
Right.
expect it to start at the same time as soon as we start our charter? Is our next election cycle, the following year, going to be based on the 3-year term?
I believe that the ballot language will show when it commences, and we can pick that date.
Okay.
Commences in 2021.
Because I would, if for some reason it does pass, I would wanna know that, you know, our staff, our commission has the opportunity to, you know, put things down and get things together, and I don't know if a year is long enough to do that. So,
Well, we may want to give ourselves enough cushion on it, we may want to say commences in 2022, even, you know. It'd be a
'Cause
long process.
if I'm running in April, right, and I win, and the 3-year passes, am I being elected to a 2-year or a 3-year term?
I would say 2-year in that case. If we put the commencement date to be 2022, then you'd be a 2-year term.
and next time you run, you'd be eligible for your 3-year term.
So if I'm not running in April, and the 3-year passes, but the next time I run, that time I am running for a 3-year term, because the charter's been passed for a year at that point.
And I think going back to the last meeting, we had given an option on city elections. If the 3-year applies, we did have some language in there as far as when the staggered terms would commence. I mean, we wrote in beginning in 2020. I mean, we could change that to 2021. I mean, I think at a minimum, we'd want to have it
Okay.
kick in 2021.
Let me actually stop us for a second, because we're going to go down a rabbit hole on this one. And if we cannot put, if it's not possible for us to put the 3-year as a standalone separate question, then all this conversation could be for naught. So I think we need to first establish if the charter has to just go as a yay or nay, and we're not allowed to put a separate question on the ballot, do we want to recommend to the commission that they try? Because if that's the case, then we would need to say, put the 3 years into the charter as staggered with all those dates worked out, because what people are voting on is what they're voting on, right? Or we've done too much work here, and we really like everything else in the charter. We don't want to take the chance of it being voted down because of this one thing,
I personally don't want the 3-year to be
the reason that it
the
goes
reason
down.
this whole thing don't pass. It can stay like it is as far as I'm concerned, if it ain't gonna pass, and
Right,
I don't wanna automatically pass a charter with 3 years in there.
okay,
well, it might be what defeats it.
To vote
right.
on the 3-year separate.
That's what happened in the past charter, right? It got shut down just for this reason.
Exactly.
So
Why are we gonna beat that up?
So, legal, if we can put it as a standalone question, then we'll move forward the way we've been discussing. If we cannot put it as a standalone question, then it's the recommendation of this board, leave it as the 2 years, and not even we're recommending to the commission, not even throw it out there. Hang on.
Why don't we
Jim.
just set the April election as a standalone for this, and then if we want to do the fall one and add the 3-year thing in there, then we do that then.
That's just a separate,
Separate election, separate issue,
well,
separate everything.
can we change the charter without doing a whole other charter?
Yes, you can. You can make as many changes or as few changes as you
I
want.
mean, if that's true, then I don't know why we wouldn't be able to put it on one ballot. But
I believe we can. I think we need to find a law that says we can't do that. We haven't
Right.
seen that yet. We're seeing examples from other cities who've been doing this, and they haven't been doing it. So I think that's what Andrea's concern is why aren't the other municipalities doing it this way? And it's a good question.
okay.
So we may need to make some calls and do some research like that. And again, I mean, I guess one of the discussions for the committee tonight is, do we want to bring this back next month at another meeting, or do we be ready to address this when we do the workshop, knowing that the commissioners are probably going to be very interested in hearing what our options are on
I
this?
think the board has given the feedback about which way we want to
Right.
go, depending on what the answer is. So
Okay.
I don't think we need another meeting just for that question. We'll have workshops, we can figure it out. Jessica, you had a hand up too.
Yeah, so my other question concerns, like, if we have to break it up, like other municipalities have done, how do we address the fact that we've moved language in some of those sections so that if one passes and one does not, the
Well-
language doesn't be redundant in 2 different sections?
I agree. That's one of my concerns when I see it set up like this, is that it does I think what we're looking at here, they're very distinct topics that are being amended. So there may not be quite the concern, this municipality may not have had that concern, but I definitely have that concern because we're talking about commission, mayor, executive officers, and elections, and a lot of those terms are cross-referenced in the other sections. So if one doesn't pass, I think you're right. I mean, it's set up to be very inconsistent. So we definitely need to,
It needs to be an all or nothing. I mean, I'm comfortable with pulling one question out about the length of a term, but that doesn't change any of the powers of any of the, all that changes is the term length. You know, I don't know how these people decided what things they were gonna put on the ballot and what I mean, we have changed a pile. You know, how do you go in there and determine these are the top 10 things that and you're gonna vote on each? That to me seems like a nightmare. Here's the new charter,
All or none.
yay or nay. I think people can understand one question about, how long the commissioners will be elected for, but, asking them to vote on all those different pieces, and I don't know what you do with the information at the end. What if I say yes on 3 of them and no on 3, right? Naeem?
What's changed between our previous charter and now when we first did the voting for the previous charter? Did we have all these questions laid out for them? Or did we have just a simple voting the charter yes
Let
or
Judy
no?
answer. She's got the most history on that.
One question, and then it's the length for a second question. 2 questions on the,
Do you approve the charter?
sorry.
Yeah,
So there's precedence for going the way we.
Yeah, one question
right.
plus the ballot.
And I think, in my memory, that's how we kind of got to this idea, because they put the charter to the people and it got voted down. And then they separated that one thing out. That got voted down, the charter, but got passed. And that's kind of how we got here.
All right, and forgive my ignorance on this legal, but question here. Being that we are a city, and I'm not trying to supersede anything, but like the whole home rule thing and where we can, we do things the way we've done it, what's best for our city. Is there anything that could take precedence on the fact that we want our charter the way it is, we all seem to agree, we worked really hard on this, and we really just want to separate this question? Is there anything that could defend us in that aspect? I don't know if home rule takes place, like I said, forgive my ignorance on this, but just because we are our own city, can we rule that?
I think that's a good point, and I think we can do that. I mean, as far as being subject to challenge, very difficult. You got to find somebody who's got standing to challenge and wants to go through that entire process. But we do have home rule powers that apply here, and we can, as long as we're not conflicting with, state statute on certain areas, which is one of the things we've been very conscientious about through this whole process, is deferring to state statute on certain things. I believe that we can do it, the all or nothing. I do think that, because, the other part of it too is, aside of what precedence is telling us, the other part of that too is, what's stopping us from saying, let's just amend one section of the charter and lump the whole thing into it and calling it one section to get around? We need to see if there's any law out there that would suggest doing it the way we're doing it is confusing, subject to challenge on that type of basis. Like, it's too broad of a question. One all or nothing is too much for a voter to digest. Something like that. Very difficult challenge. Got to have the right person that would be willing to challenge it and go the distance on that. But we'll definitely hone in on that and make sure we know what all of our options are. But right now, I really don't see why we can't do the all or nothing question.
And if I may follow up, who would challenge Newberry on that? I'm not trying to say we're high and mighty and powerful. I'm actually saying we're the little guys here. Who would actually come down on us saying they can't do that?
It would be a voter,
Okay.
a disgruntled voter, could be a taxpayer, somebody like that. Sometimes, you know, a voter would be somebody who's registered to vote, actually participates in the vote, and it doesn't turn out the way that voter wants it.
And then what would happen after that? I'm sorry, forgive me, guys, but this is where we recently talked about the commission and removing somebody from the commission. All the steps, there was like 21 steps that had to take place to remove a commissioner. When it comes to the charter, that one voter, would they have to go out, get 600 votes or 1,000 signatures? Is there
They
a
would just
process for them to do
There,
this?
there is a process, and it's complicated.
It's just, okay.
I won't say it's quite as complicated as what you're alluding to, but no, it's you know, it's basically like an initiative petition type process or something like that. I mean,
Okay.
it's very complicated.
So it would make that voter have to go out, work, and
Yes.
from our experience, likelihood, the way Newberry runs, forgive me, but I've seen a lot of talk from certain voters, and they just, like a fart in the wind, they're gone.
It's a challenge, yes.
I'm with you, but I wouldn't wanna set us up for any kind
Right.
of spending.
I agree.
No, yeah.
Over this here, I
Aye.
wouldn't wanna set us up for something that you go back, tell us what we can or can't do, and let's roll with that.
I agree.
I don't wanna set us up for no spending legal money for nothing.
Right.
That's,
All right, but we'll have these kind of
Yeah, yeah.
answers by the workshop.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are there any other questions about Article 7, city elections?
Thank you.
No? All right, I'll entertain a motion. All right, Madam Clerk, do I have a motion already for Article 7?
You do not have a
I do
motion.
not have a motion. I'll entertain a motion for Article 7. I have a motion from Mark and a second from Mark. So first motion from Mark Clark, second from Mark Allen. All right, any further comments on the motion on the floor? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously, and now we have a recap of all of the articles. And I enjoyed reading through this one because, you know, you can feel the difference, you know? Rich, are you taking us through that, or do you want me to?
I'm happy to go through it. We covered this, again in the last.
We've done
meeting.
6 and 7, so you don't have to do those.
We will skip 6 and 7. I spent probably, I spent a decent amount of time, I think, trying to recap everything last time around, and I think Miss Amy has done a magnificent job in the minutes of plugging in a lot of that outline. So it's in our agenda here. I'm sorry, it's in the meeting minutes from the last meeting. So basically, you know, we began the process in August. It's brought us all the way up to June, and we, in many cases, shortened up a lot of the sections, starting with Article 1.
And general provisions. And then in September, we covered the powers of the city, which again, we didn't really have many changes other than just some cleanup, clarification, things like that. Section 5 dealt with ordinances and resolutions. We again shortened that article up. In many cases, gave references to state statutes, particularly on bonds, removed bond language, since so much of that is covered by state statute. And then in October, we talked about the mayor, Article 3, and clarified that we have a commission, city manager form of government. We, I think, had decided we were going to move some of the mayor powers into, this is kind of interesting to see how this whole process unfolded. I think the thought in October was, let's move a lot of the mayor powers and responsibilities into the executive officer section. That was probably a foreshadowing to all the problems we were going to have discussing that section. When we then decided that we're going to stick to the three charter officers being discussed as executive officers, meaning that the mayor powers and responsibilities would get volleyed back to Article 3. We brought this up at the last meeting, and decided ultimately to strike many of those sections. I think we pared it down maybe almost completely. I think if you look at the red line version we have now, that part of it has largely been taken out. We then in November talked about, we kind of brushed on this a little bit earlier, but when the mayor takes office, it's the 10-day period after the election, no later than 30 days. One thing that we probably do need to discuss a little bit tonight is we cleaned up the section on in November, Article 4 Commission. We talked about the different types of meetings, and I thought we did some really good work cleaning up, the meeting place. We built in some flexibility for the commissioner, or for the city commission to prescribe a different place other than City Hall to hold a meeting. In section, what's now number 16, we spelled out what a regular meeting is, what a special meeting is, what an emergency meeting is, and what a workshop is. One thing that we do need to talk about tonight is there was a brief discussion in our last meeting about conference sessions, and we probably, in the red line that we gave you, we probably should have struck subsection E altogether, because I think that was the preference of the committee in the last meeting, and instead the committee was looking for some clarification. There was some discussion about how at the county level, county commissioners sometimes meet 2 at a time in a public setting, and they may have a debate about a particular issue, and there was a question of how do we work that into our charter, should we, what's the process, and that sort of thing. We did look at this, and I actually talked to Dave Wagner, former county attorney, about this. The answer to that question is it's definitely not appropriate charter material. The county does not have that written into their charter. And you treat that situation just like you would treat any other special meeting or regular meeting, essentially. You do public notice. If it's a special meeting, then you identify what are the topics, and if only 2 commissioners show up because they want to debate it or they want to have a discussion in a public forum, then that's their prerogative. There's no quorum in that context, so there's nothing that can be voted on. But you would notice it up just like you would a special meeting, essentially. So that's sort of the mechanism for that. That's what the county has followed for the last 20 years or so. Since the mid-90s, they've started doing that occasionally. I don't know if that's ever happened here in Newberry, but it is an option based on the way the charter reads. We don't have to write anything in that's special. So our recommendation would be to go ahead and strike the conference session concept at this point, because we know we also have this other option. And so that's that. We can stop and have some discussion on that, or I can run us through the rest of the...
Let's stop on that one
Okay.
for just 1 second. Because you said one thing that kind of just made me think, are any of these meetings charter worthy? I mean, obviously the commission's going to meet. Should we just have an ordinance that goes through all the different types of meetings that then you could, or should the regular commission meetings be in the charter, but everything else be done by ordinance? I mean, I'm fine with striking E out of this and just rolling on, but I'm trying to find out, why would a workshop necessarily, the structure of a workshop, why would that need to be in the charter?
Well, that's probably a closer call in the context of a workshop, I would say. I think it might be a good idea to keep in the regular meeting and special meeting points or definitions, if you will. It's just an example, and maybe this would be the commission's preference, I don't know, but I was attending a commission meeting in another city recently, and the meeting went on for a long time. A really, really long time. And one of the commissioners finally said, what can we do about changing up to 2 meetings a month instead of 1 meeting a month? Under their charter, they're 1 meeting a month. It's a viable question, but you need to change the charter to do it. It can't be just on the dais right then and there. The commission votes and, we change it. Now, maybe the commission wants to have that flexibility, but, you know, it's good, you know, I believe it's good to have that structure in stone, if you will, in your charter, so it's not so easy to change that. Otherwise, that could be changed on a monthly basis, which would add a lot of confusion, I'm sure, for city staff having to deal with that circumstance all the time. Now, your question about a workshop, I think that's a closer call. We could probably have some discussion about it, whether
Well,
that should be in there.
I mean, we've taken out a lot. What's the feel about item E, striking that one and just leave the workshop in there? That way we at least have some terminology that are in there, or strike D and E. But
Say
leave D, strike E, strike.
I say strike E2. I feel like it's sort of vague anyway.
Okay,
Everything else, I'm good.
all right. That was the majority of the head nod, so proceed. sir. Yep.
My only concern is that the language, I think, but I can't find where it says that in the other sections. I think it was changed. There was concern that you couldn't go to, say, nations.
Another
or-
place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
champions rather, and have a meeting. And if the language was included under special meetings where they could be called in other places, it could be.
that's what I thought we were talking about with E, actually, was calling a meeting at a different location than City Hall. I know we had talked about what if two commissioners want to hash it out about something, but I thought E was really about calling a meeting at a different location than it was about that.
So there, if you look at, I'm not sure I'm answering their question, but I want to point you to section 15. That very first sentence is where we built in, meetings of the city commission shall be held at the usual place of holding meetings of the city commission, which would be the city hall, or at such other place as the city commission may prescribe. In theory, that gives the city commission the ability to designate a place other than the city hall for any type of meeting, quite honestly.
Okay, then I'm good with that. Yeah. All right, strike E and move on. And Bonnie, you are a voting member, so if you want to say, we just ran out of microphone, so just jump up. Yeah. All right.
So then that takes us to January. Article 4, we continued some discussion on the commission. We made a clarification that the mayor has the ability to object to a resolution or ordinance, but not necessarily veto. So that was cleaned up. Then we got into the last half of the year is dedicated to executive officers. Roughly. February, we started talking about the executive officers, and we brought that back several times. We were during that process, we were able to also address some of the non-controversial sections in terms of extending or contracting territorial limits, which we removed because that's basically annexation and handled by statute. We cleaned up some other general clauses and cleaned up some other language regarding bonds for consistency's sake. And then that is the essence of it right there.
Okay. Yep, Miss Jessica.
I have a question on section 19B,
What article are we in?
Article 5. So, the way I'm reading it, and perhaps I'm reading it wrong, the first two sentences of that should probably go up to section 17, and then it start on final passage, the vote of each member, because it's kind of strange that it starts an effective date with what is talking about a quorum
Okay.
and vote for the emergency ordinance versus regular.
Okay, let me just make sure, it took me a while.
So your
we're in
point
Article
is-
5, effective date, section 19, B. Okay.
So your point is basically the second paragraph is where the section should really start. When
Or
it
the-
says, unless otherwise provided for in the effective date clause of an ordinance,
or the third sentence, because the third sentence is, on final passage, the vote of each member of the governing body voting shall be entered on the official record of the meeting. All ordinances or resolutions passed by the governing body shall become effective 10 days after passage or as otherwise provided therein.
And tell me again, where, those first two sentences, where did you think we should plug that in?
Should they go up to section 17, which is about quorum, minimum votes necessary to adopt ordinance or resolution?
Seems like a logical place,
Seems like it's just redundant.
right?
Section 17, yeah, it talks
But
about
it's
quorum as
not-
well.
Entirely, because this is the only place that addresses what that 2/3 is required for an emergency ordinance.
So under 17, it says a majority of all members of the city commission shall constitute a quorum. Under 19, it says a majority of the members of the governing body shall constitute a quorum. An affirmative vote of the majority of quorum is present is necessary to enact an ordinance or adopt any resolution, except that 2/3 of the membership of the board is required to enact an emergency ordinance. Right, up there.
So we could merge that into section 17, so we could remove the redundant language, but include the exception regarding the
emergency.
2/3 of the membership.
2/3 of the membership for the emergency. What's 2/3 of 5? 3? Isn't that what you always need to enact a resolution?
The first two sentences of it would be moved to 17.
Rich, why do we say that 2/3 of the membership of the board is required? So that doesn't mean that they have to vote for it, they have to be present. So you have to have a quorum and they have to be unanimous in order to enact an emergency ordinance. So if you have only 3 people present and 2 say yes and 1 says no, it fails for an emergency ordinance. Well, it does seem to me like there should be a section that talks about regular ordinances and then one that talks about emergency ordinances. And that way you're separated. Is that what's intended here between section 17 and section 19? I thought B was just talking about ordinances, but then it says emergency ordinance.
Mhm. Well, I think that could still go in 17 as well. I mean, the emergency, I mean, I guess we get into a discussion over what exactly is an emergency ordinance. Is it an ordinance that's at issue in an emergency meeting only, or is it an emergency, you know?
Right. And I guess that, except that 2/3 of the members of the board is required to enact emergency, that doesn't say that they have to agree, it just says they have to be present. So that would
Right.
still mean that too. But I don't know why I had to say that, because I need 3 votes to pass it if all 5 are here. I need 2 to pass it if just 3 are here. I mean, I need a majority of whoever's up there.
Right,
So it seems like a meaningless statement.
right. I mean, I agree, it doesn't.
What it tells me is that for an emergency ordinance, that it doesn't take a quorum of the whole board.
But it still takes 2/3, which is a quorum.
Membership.
2/3 of the members to be able to vote or
Which is a quorum.
act on. It doesn't say they have to
Right.
be all in favor.
All in favor, right. But either way, I still have to have 3 before I can vote on anything.
You're kind of mixing two sections, though. You're mixing Article 4 and 5. Article 4 is just talking about what the city commission is doing, and it says what a quorum is. Then the next section is 5, you're talking about ordinances and resolutions, and then you're talking about what it takes to pass one. So it's in the right area. It shouldn't be up in the city commission area about what passes or not. You're just saying what a quorum is in the city commission area.
And
So section 17
4.
is fine the way it is.
right.
So-
I agree. I just don't think, I still think ends up being a meaningless statement because you need a majority of whoever's present to pass anything.
The only thing you're doing is you're actually just saying again at the bottom what a quorum is.
I need a quorum and I have to have a
Yeah.
majority of that quorum to pass anything.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, either delete it or make it a little clearer, so that we don't have that whole, do I have to have unanimous in an emergency? And then if it is, then we have to have a conversation about what constitutes an emergency. Because if we have an emergency and we've declared a state of emergency, now the city manager has the authority to act unilaterally, so what's the commission voting on anyway?
So.
I agree.
The language we're talking about under effective date, the first two sentences, it comes from Florida Statute 166.041, and I'll just read that if that helps to clarify. Maybe we'll still have more questions, but a majority of the members of a governing body shall constitute a quorum. An affirmative vote of a majority of a quorum present is necessary to enact any ordinance or adopt any resolution, except that 2/3 of the membership of the board is required to enact an emergency ordinance. On final passage, the vote of each member of the governing body shall be entered on the official record.
So one thing we could do here is defer to the statute and
Yeah.
cut this language out. You know, if there's ever an issue, then we go to state statute and we look at case law and how that provision's interpreted, but, you know, that is,
So all of
it's 166.
B, you're saying, take out, or just the
Just the
first
first
paragraph?
two sentences.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's 166.041.
Oh, okay.
Is that before? It's right
Oh, okay. I think, does it continue on through the whole first paragraph, or where is it?
there. Yeah, the 10 days effective date.
Yeah, it's actually the entire first paragraph.
Mhm.
Is right out of the
comes-
state.
Comes straight from the statute. I mean, that's, so what I would recommend we do there is, take that language out and specifically refer to the statute on it. I mean, that's what we have been doing in this process on this. I'm not sure why we didn't do it here. But, I mean, we've got a note in the comments that says this section comes from 166.041.
So what you'll bring back is under B, refer to state statute.
For that first paragraph, the second paragraph, I don't know that that tracks the statute.
Let's see, I'll double check. I think.
I mean, if that is the state statute, then we don't need to say see the
Right,
state statute,
right.
we can just leave it the way it is, that state statute, right? My only
Go
problem with the
either way.
second paragraph, and I just realized I missed this when I was looking through, it still mentions the mayor's veto, and I think we need to remove that language.
Okay. I'm
Uh,
sorry, where is this?
It's in the second paragraph at the bottom. It says, special emergency meeting, if the city commission shall then pass an ordinance by 3 affirmative votes of the members elected thereto, the mayor's veto and objections notwithstanding, it shall become a law. I'll just say the mayor's objections notwithstanding, that way we
Right.
don't
Right.
infer a veto power.
Yeah, you can't be voting, bro.
And it was always like a weak veto anyway. You refuse to sign it, and then they just pass it again. You know, but
It's kind of like, in a way, you're voting.
yeah, I'm delaying. Yeah.
So I think what the consensus is we'll change that word veto, obviously, but going back to subsection B, we will leave the language in there, and I think what we will also do is include the C section 166.041 of the state statutes. So
Right.
that's a quick reference. Somebody reads the language and says, well, this doesn't make sense. Well, at least go to the statute and see what that says.
Okay.
That's,
All right. Any other questions from the board on our recap? Okay, we will move on to commission recommendations, and these are sort of the things that you guys want to push up the chain to the commission. Any thoughts that you guys have? I think the last time we had the same agenda item and we sort of focused on how are we going to break this thing up for the commission. It's always tough. You know, you guys have been working on this for a year. You've been reading the existing charter, you've been talking about it, you've been reading the new one. How do you get 5 people to where you guys all are at this point? And so I think we had discussed, and was it Article 6 and 7 putting in one workshop, Rich? It was legals?
We
You know, like
discussed
1, 2
actually, okay. We had some great discussion on having workshops. I think that would be very valuable, rather than just taking this straight to the commission and presenting it when they just don't have a really good feel for what it is we've been talking about for 10 months. But the first workshop would focus on the most controversial, which would be sections 4 and 6.
Articles 4 and 6.
I'm sorry, Articles 4 and 6, which would be the commission and the executive officers. If we can also pick a third one, probably it would make sense to do Article 3, the mayor, since they sort of all interrelate. Even though that seems to be not quite as controversial, but then the second meeting, we would lump together basically everything else that's non-controversial. Most of it would probably be a yawner for the commissioners at the workshop, but we could then set a third workshop that would come back and revisit the more controversial ones, unless we could knock it out in the second workshop. But my guess is we should probably set aside 3 workshop dates.
I think that's a pretty good plan. Do the controversial stuff, get it on everybody's plate, let them sleep on it, talk to folks, have the next workshop, you know, a couple weeks later about all of the stuff that's more bureaucratic. And then we could just gauge at that point, all right, do we need to have a third workshop and go back over that stuff that was controversial because people needed time to think about it, or is everybody on the same page and ready to move forward? Is that?
Let me add one caveat to that. I think we also discussed in that second meeting, specifically discussing the term lengths and the staggering in that second meeting. So that might be the one substantive part that requires a little more discussion.
Is that for the work? I kind of see this in 2 parts. I see the workshops as trying to get to the commission to where you guys are now, and then those are obviously open to the public as well. We would encourage people to come. Then I see the agenda items, right, as a whole separate sort of issue, and there may be a meeting where we have it on the agenda just for discussion, so that we said we've had all the workshops, everybody's thought about it, let's talk about it now, and then we have on another meeting where we actually vote on whether or not we want to put it to the public. And Ms. Judy, we have to vote twice to put it, so we need 2 readings. So that would give us potentially 3 workshops and potentially 3 scheduled agended meetings where it's up for discussion. First one, just up for discussion, then two, that way when people come in halfway through the story and they throw an objection, we can say, look, these have been open to the public for a year. We had 3 public workshops. We had it on the agenda for a discussion. We had a first reading and we had a second reading. We have pieced it out to try to give everybody an opportunity to come and talk. Does that sound like a
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
name?
Is there a deadline that we need to hit with these commission workshops?
Yeah.
So we have enough time?
We have to have
I
it.
mean, is there a deadline that you want to hit?
I want to have it all done by October.
So the commission's workshops would be done by October?
Yeah, I may not, but with the 2 readings, it may be at November. It might even be the first reading in December. I think what I'm thinking is that 90% of what's in this charter is going to be approved by everybody.
Yeah.
So those kinds of community outreach, I can go ahead and start working on.
Okay.
The controversial stuff may take a little bit longer, but we can go ahead and start communicating with people that, hey, we need a charter that's 100% in the 21st century. Right? We need a charter that doesn't contradict itself. We need to do the cleanup. That kind of stuff we can go ahead and start the public education on. If the commission and the town is still sort of struggling with the staggered terms, we put that into the public education. Hey, here's the pros and the cons. We're not trying to persuade people one way or the other. We're trying to say this is what's good about both ideas, and you guys make up your own mind. So, but I'd like that the bulk of it, I'd like to be done by October, November. That way we can really begin. I don't feel like it's appropriate for me to start public education about the work that you guys have done until we have a reasonable thought that the commission's on that same page. Then, because otherwise they may change something and what I told people is not right anymore, you know? All right. Anything else that you guys want you want staff, you want me to communicate to the commission about this process, about what your expectations are for how we proceed in the future and timelines? And, no?
I think you got it down pat.
All right.
As far as I'm concerned.
How about,
Would she be considered
well,
public comment at this point?
no. Just, will you hand her that mic there, Rich, so we can get it on record?
Bonnie Hauser, citizen, also member of this lovely committee.
Yeah.
This may already be something you're going to do when communicating with the commissioners, but I think, could it just be put to them that we've just tried to condense it, we've tried to rely on Florida state statutes so that these workshops are not 4 hours long?
That part has already been
Can it be
communicated.
something where here's the old one, here's the new one, you 5 come with any prepared questions. Of course, we would answer anything that they had, but couldn't we put the onus on them a little bit to come prepared for that workshop? And I have no problem calling all 5 of them and telling them my opinion on it.
And I would say, with the exception of Commissioner Norfleet, just because he's pretty new and we've had other things, that I have been in pretty constant communication with them. That basic was, everybody's on that page.
Okay.
And that was their direction, if you remember, the vote to create this committee.
Right,
was
they're the
to,
ones who wanted
let's
this committee,
condense
so
it.
I would think they'd already kind of have a little,
Yeah. So
Okay.
they have been following. There's there have been a lot of changes, and generally when I talk to them, it's about the bigger ticket items.
Right.
So now comes the time to really go into the details.
okay. Well, I just kind of
we
wanted
have
that on
this-
record, to let's just,
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't want to be in those workshops for.
we don't
4
need
hours.
another year's worth of workshops to explain
Yeah.
to the 5 of them what we've been doing for a year.
We do, I'm
Agreed.
getting on the retirement plan.
Yes, I'm on the retired committee for that one.
Honestly, we better commission being as they are already, between the 5 that are there
Start my
currently,
401K,
are
get this
gonna be
free.
quick and slick for this. I think they have a lot of confidence.
All right, any other commission recommendations? All right, committee member comments. Jim? Ms. Gale? Mr. Mark? Jessica? Ms. Naeem?
All right, I do have a comment. First off, happy Father's Day to all fathers out there. Second off, one of my church members wanted me to let people know that we do have what's called a Catholic Clerk Workshop Camp here in Gainesville. This is St. Francis High School kids that do this. They get together. Basically, they want to know if anybody in our community in Newberry is in need of yard work done, any kind of grass, whatever it is, painting, cleaning windows, basically community service, community outreach to those. If you can email, and I'll spell this out, it's CHWC, so Catholic Clerk Workshop .Gainesville@gmail.com. So that's CHWC.Gainesville@gmail.com. And anybody that you may know in the community that, whether elderly, needs a little help around to clean up their house, they'll be more than happy to assist. Other than that, happy Father's Day. Hope everybody had a great weekend. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Walt? Mark?
No, sir.
Bonnie?
Oh, I do have a question. Bonnie Hauser. Have we decided any dates for these workshops yet?
No, the dates for the workshops we have not. We suggested late July, August for
Okay.
the first one.
Okay.
And so we'll see how we hit that. We got a lot of vacation calendars over
Yeah.
the summer, so we'll see. But
Okay,
we'll
that was
get
my only
them.
question.
I just want to thank everybody. We have everybody up here. You guys have dedicated 10 months of your time to do this. I appreciate each and every one of you, your commitment. It's not over yet. We need to work on the commission. and then we need to work on the town. So the whole reason why we have such a diverse group of people up here from different sectors of the town with different networks is that hopefully, since you've been a part of it, you are on board with the changes that have been made, and you can be positive voices in the community for why people should vote yes. We all have had the experience where somebody doesn't like the way it goes, and they can really turn it sour, especially if they don't have all the information. You guys have all the information, and so you can go out there, and if people say, well, I heard it's this, you can say, that's not what we're talking about. This is the proposal, this is what we've done. Because, so I appreciate what you've done. I thank you for what you were all about to embark on for the next 6 or 7 months until we get this thing. Uh-oh, is that an Amber Alert?
Nobody.
No, okay. And if there's anything I can ever do to repay you for all that you've given to the city, you don't have anything, just let me know. And
That pool would be really cool.
yeah, well, I'm working on it. Yeah. Public comments. Hearing none,